ChatGPT is on point. You know what I mean? Like, and what's funny is if you go back to listings in like the early 2000s, 12, 13, 14, 15, you see the description and they're like all caps. They're like, don't even spell the word block. They're like BLK. Like, and that was a description like
Right.
for a property. And now it's like a novel. It's like a poem. You see these like crazy words, like stunning and all this stuff.
This podcast is about real estate with intelligence. It is pulling the sword from the stone. This podcast is about that unique balance in real estate, that balance between technological intelligence and our emotional intelligence, and the transactions and interactions with one another in the real estate process. That's why we're inviting expert guests, people who are knowledgeable and bring different perspective. Join me in exploring this fascination, the look behind the scenes of technological advancement and how it's interacting with people's decisions in real estate. Danny, welcome to Real Estate with Intelligence podcast. It is so great to have you on today. Tell us a little bit about your journey. Someone who's been near and dear to my heart in terms of property management for a dozen years or so, and then you've transitioned your career into a higher form of real estate, if you will, doing sales with a big time broker, and you're already highly successful. Tell us a little bit about that transition for you, what you loved about property management, and you know what taste of your new life as a big time sales guy is.
First and foremost, Tommy, thanks for inviting me. This is a stupendous setup. It is very professional, and I feel important, and it's always nice to feel important, which is a good segue kind of into, my career, I guess. And before I got into property management, I sold new homes, and then I kind of stumbled into property management and was able to get a taste for all that it has to offer. And there's a lot there. There is a lot there. And for me, I think I can say this, not to be long-winded, because I will be long-winded on this episode, but you can pretty much learn everything in real estate and property management. I think I would kind of attribute that to my success, in sales, because real estate is a relationship-based business.
Wow. So yes, hitting on that relationship, how are people seeing you now? Or are they seeing you any differently from your property management days? Now you're selling $1 million homes, and not only $1 million homes, but it's funny. I was talking to you about all the different sales you've had in the last couple of years. And you're saying it's really about the relationship. So speak to that. Are people seeing you differently now, or is it that it's just carrying over differently from what you did before to now?
I think the latter just carries over differently. We were talking earlier before sitting down and recording like we are now about this idea of transactional versus relations. And you're forced to have relationships in property management that maybe you don't want to have, but you're forced to have them, and you're like almost forced to make them the best that you possibly can, regardless of the other person involved, because essentially that's your job. So what I found out is that carried over really well into sales.
So if home is defined by the client buying it, you and your wife went through an experience buying your own home 2 years ago. Tell us a little about how you define home for the two of you.
Well, my definition of home is very different than my wife's, which I think is probably normal in most relationships to some degree. We were forced by COVID. She was immunocompromised, so being trapped inside in a condo building was highly uncomfortable, and the idea of having backyard space trumped any thought, logic, or opinion I had, and so that was it. So home for us was like our literally own. So it was like ours, like there were no neighbors and we could walk outside. and not go down an elevator. That was kind of the definition. Maybe freedom is how I would kind of define the way she viewed it.
So she viewed it as freedom.
I viewed it as more money.
And good investment, looking back?
So far, I give her all the credit on that. Yeah, definitely.
Wow, she sees it as freedom and you're giving her credit, and you just see it as a higher cost.
Yeah, I'm in constant financial fear.
Well, that's really interesting. Financial fear. You left this idea of a more regular income in property management to saying, hey, like I have these relationships, people that believe in me, that trust me to help them with their real estate decisions, and they recognize that you're not just in it for any one transaction, that you're actually in it for the long-term relationship and real estate perspective and expertise that you bring to the table. What experience did you have in property management that has given you a different edge in becoming a top real estate salesperson?
Painful conversations. 100%. You're having very scary, tough, challenging, painful conversations in property management. And I think that enough of those makes what I do seem kind of almost easy. But not easy, but it's like I know what's coming. Like I know what to get ahead of, because I spent so many times having conversations with tenants and landlords alike, just seeing mistakes, seeing systems that failed, things to pay attention to, and just I think that's kind of the big takeaway.
The anticipation of what that problem might be to them, and then having some tools with how to solve that conflict with them in that relationship. That's that edge.
Yeah, and it's expectation management. Because I'll tell you a funny story. I had this a client who went to school with my wife, so that's kind of the trust. And she saw that I had gone, from rentals and property management to sales. She knew the brokerage I was with, and they asked me they called me up, like, "Hey, we want to buy this house." And I was like, "Okay, like, you sure?" And they're like, "Yeah." So I just wrote an offer. They didn't get it, but like the way I had acted and like got things in place to work in a very short amount of time, like kind of gave them like, all right, this guy knows what he's doing. So we continued to work together, and I told them the whole time, like, you're going to have to spend more money to get what you want, but not in a mean way, just like, hey. And when it got down to it, like the nitty gritty, the wire, they're like, no, we can't spend this much. But the whole time I kind of prepped them, and I was just like, it's this process in this climate, in this market, it's never going to feel good in the moment, but like, just, you got to trust the process. Like I won't, like I'll steer you right. And we eventually got them there. They're super happy, but it was painful. She was like, scream crying on the phone about paying $10,000 more. So I think that's the idea, because it's an emotional process, like any real estate, but especially purchasing when you're spending, $1.2 million, like it's a lot of money, but letting the people know that it's going to be tough, as opposed to being like, oh, this is going to be so easy, because that's my pitch. Like I want to make it easy for you, but making it easy for you is letting you know like what it's going to look like.
Well, and there's value in that process.
Exactly.
To make something from tough to easy. Well, and I guess that's also that correlation with property management and sales, right? Mm-hmm. Like there is nothing easy about property management. I say property management wouldn't even exist if it weren't for problems between landlords and tenants and homes, right? And it's interesting how you've taken that into the sales process. It is not easy, and yet the toughness, your expertise helps them make that easy or make easier, and that's part of the value add you're creating in the way.
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, I think my favorite thing about property management is this idea that you have to serve the client, and the client is the landlord, but you may not even talk to the client, and you do all this work with the tenant, getting the house, and it's strange. So it's like, understanding who the client is, having allegiance, having boundaries. There's a lot that goes into it that makes a sales process and like those intricacies of it very simple. On like kind of where, who are you serving, and that kind of thing. So I think we can talk a lot about, I think, how the complexities of property management, of rentals, of tenant personality, landlord, really just makes everything else in real estate easier.
So tell us a little bit about your years in property management, some tough scenarios.
Yeah.
And do you see anything funny, wild, crazy, really hard to deal with?
Yeah, there's one tenant who was doing an Airbnb out of his condo, wouldn't pay rent, would answer the phone, tell you a story, and you come to check on the house, and he was never there. Couldn't figure out if he was there, if he ever lived there, who was living there, and like he just disappeared, like Kaiser Soze one day. So that was kind of like one of the strangest things. But yeah, I mean, I think property management in general can be crazy, but it's really not as bad as people make it out to be, I don't think.
So any insights for potential investors, people that are about to become landlords, maybe their first time doing it, from your perspective, your years and expertise in property management, what would you say, hey, if you're going into it, like, here are a couple key things I'd suggest for you?
Number one is you have to identify like why you're doing this. What's the goal? Like, you have to be crystal clear on that. Is it a 2-year vision? Is it a 10-year vision? Is it a 30-year vision? So I have a client now who's currently purchasing properties, but his vision is like 10, 20, 30 years. Like, he's looking at long-term returns, and he's finding, like, he knows what he wants. He's very crystal clear about it. So it's very simple. But if you just kind of are going into it wishy-washy, trying to make money right away, I think, and you're not clear on that, it's problematic, because generally speaking, I think it costs more money than you think to actually have a successful property management business. And if you think about it from just a landlord's perspective, it's their business and they're hiring you, Chambers, to help run their business.
Business manager.
Yeah, essentially. So, and I think the hard thing is like getting, well, I say you because I don't do it anymore, but like, is getting our clients to think like business people and not glorified babysitters, or like, how, you know what I mean? It's like you have to get out of that like mindset.
Oh man, I was gonna put that on my next business card. Glorified babysitter.
Well, that's what they want to do. They're just like, don't have them mess the house, behave, and pay us rent.
Sure.
And I think it can be, that's where the client has to kind of define and get educated on like kind of what the goal is. Are you renting for 5? Are you renting for 10? Are you going to sell it? Are you coming back? What's happening? So
with this concept of real estate with intelligence, and there's lots of different things that means, right? There's artificial intelligence is the hot topic in today's world. You have technological advancement, you have true IQ, you have emotional intelligence. Do you have a certain perspective on, which one is more valuable, or is AI going to take over in any aspect of the real estate industry at some point? Where do you see those worlds of intelligence colliding, and what's your strong suit, or what do you leverage to work with your clients within that?
So question one, do I see them colliding? Yes, because everything in this world collides, because everyone wants to make things collide, because I think they're idiots for the most part. But really, I think we're already seeing them work kind of hand in hand, because at the end of the day, you do the same thing I do, really. Like, we got to get photos, we got to make a listing look pretty, we got to get descriptions, we got to do all this stuff. And like, AI comes in really handy for that. ChatGPT is on point. You know what I mean? Like, and what's funny is if you go back to listings in like the early 2000s, 12, 13, 14, 15, you see the description, and they're like all caps. They're like, don't even spell the word block. They're like BLK. Like, and that was a description, like, right, for a property. And now it's like a novel. It's like a poem. You see these like crazy words, like stunning and all this stuff. One of my favorite lines is reimagined. That's a good selling one. But so all that, and you see our assistants, our people who write it, or sometimes I write it. There's a lot of work that goes into that. So to get rid of that time is huge. Yeah, and that's truly. And like, AI can help with that. Like, that does not need to be human. But that's just one of the things that we see now that's like really helpful. But I think the emotional connection, the human to connection, is going to get stronger and prevail over time when it comes to what we do, because there's no way that you're putting that type of asset into the hands of a computer ever.
Yeah. It's funny. You just had me like in a throwback moment in my head. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I remember when, I'm going to date myself, and you'll probably remember this in the industry too, but to do an open house or an advertisement in a newspaper. I don't even know if that even happens anymore. Sorry to the newspapers out there, but we would have to. They would charge you by the line, number of lines in the advertisement. So I did an advertisement, and I said, "Beautiful home, a brand new, never lived in, blah 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 blah." And I remember my boss at the time, the owner of the company, he looked at me. He's like, "I paid $160 extra because you put the word beautiful and brand new and never lived in next to each other." He's like, "First of all, beautiful, it's a long word that means nothing. Second of all, isn't brand new and never lived in the same thing?" So, he's like, I charged an extra $160 because of all this, what do we call it, puffery in the real estate industry. And what's so ironic about that whole thing now is, like you said, that like there's these poems being written by computers in listings that are not limited by the number of lines or words or text characters that we're allowed to use anymore. And it's so fascinating what you drew that parallel of, hey, if you just look at over time, the quality of the pictures, over time, the quality of the copy or the listing descriptions, how it's changed, both in the rental and property management industry as in the sales industry. For someone who does high-end sales now, where do you see technology playing into that's going to take us where the start of the next progression, right? Like if 20 years ago I'm getting yelled at for putting beautiful as an extra word that didn't belong, 20 years from now, obviously really tough question, but what do you see the seeds of in technology that might be impacting the future in real estate?
Oh man, that's a good question. I mean, the first thing that comes to mind, and I've never thought about this. Well, I guess I have, but I've never been asked a question. Would be there's some way you can tour the home, because we've done it. I've seen it. I've seen VR already, but that becomes like the norm. But I still don't think it works. I still don't think it actually changes what we're already seeing today, because now, and mind you, this has been unprecedented. I think the last couple, 2-3 years of people buying property sight unseen.
Yeah.
Right. That's like happening often. In fact, there's a deal happening now where that's going on that I'm a part of. But here's the deal. You have to see it. You have to touch it. You have to smell it. I think smell is the important one.
Well, that's interesting.
It is. It is very interesting.
Yeah.
And so I just don't see, I think these vehicles will essentially, what will happen is real estate agents like myself and you will try and use them to our advantage to create some edge. But really, I think the edge is finding our niche. And like, I still think I'm doing that, like figuring out what it is that I'm really good at. What is it that I kind of have against the other guy that makes me a little different? Not that I can't do the other things, but like, what am I really, really good at? And I think if we start turning technology to be like, oh, I can do this. Oh, I can do that. It's like, we all do that. We already do that. Like, thank you, Compass. You know what I mean? Seriously. Because they just got everyone to elevate their games. Like, that's what happened.
Competition is good for the market.
Competition is great. Yeah, it's disruptive. So it's good. So everyone up their games. But really, I think the outliers and the people who are going to separate themselves are the people who actually do the work and kind of can maintain the relationships. I think that's what wins over time.
So what makes you be able to smell a property better than other realtors?
Oh, man. I mean,
smell's important.
I was blessed. I don't know how, but just with really good taste.
Okay.
I just have it. I know nice stuff when I see it.
Wow.
And it just works out that way.
What a great gift.
It's a great gift.
Yeah, I think there's something really interesting here, actually. I never even thought about it before this conversation, which is, we literally were talking about taste and smell in being really important in housing decisions. And we made that connection lightheartedly, but yes, we and yet there's also something about taste and smell that has a strong connection to your emotional memory banks. And I'm wondering, I'm curious, not that either of us have the answer. I'm wondering and curious if there's something to that, that emotional connection to a house based on how it might smell, or people who have different refined tastes or or affinity of memory for certain smells and how that relates to the home that they're looking at. Is it all visual based on the pictures we were talking about, or will that virtual purchase really work as well as walking in through the door? And that visual versus that olfactory sense has something to do with this.
Oh, it definitely has something to do with it. I mean, think about a store that you frequent. It smells the same all the time.
Especially when it's baked goods, I'm buying more stuff.
Exactly. So I think that's kind of the correlation. And I think you brought up a good point that like that resonates with the consumer. I think for our business, real estate, what you're selling is you're selling yourself, and you're selling essentially your vision of how you do business and how you kind of view human interaction. Like what is acceptable to you? Because certain people have different ideas, and you start clashing, and that's like those are the forced relationships. You're like, no, I think this is the right thing to do. Like, no, that's definitely not the right thing to do. And you're like, ooh, we have a moral compass is not, So when you get into this idea of like, we're always selling, right? Mm-hmm. We're always selling, but not selling in the capacity that you may think about it. Of like, I'm trying to get you to buy something from me. But we are selling. And I think if you think about like energy, feel, and all of that, that's equally as important as a visual. It's equally important as a price tag, because it's a lifestyle, to back onto what you're saying. And like, that's a memory that they have. And you have to, like, as a salesperson, you have to be involved in that. So it's like, you have to tackle every aspect of the process. Property management, you're not showing the house. If the last tenant who moved there threw 30 keggers and like, they clogged the toilet, you're not letting people in there. Yeah. So it's like, it's taking something that's so grungy and disgusting like that and using that in a much more high level. But I'm saying it's all the same.
Yeah, different degrees.
It's all the same, and so you have to be aware of that. So I think that's what makes us different. Is like you're selling a lifestyle, so you're trying to sell someone in an honest way what they came to find. And if you kind of miss these little areas, then essentially you're not doing your job. So that's kind of how I think of it.
So as someone who has built a successful and well-respected career in property management and now sales of real estate, and since we're talking about real estate with intelligence, can you give us a human moment, a human side of Danny Boitel that says, like, yeah, I'm smart. I use my emotional intelligence to build relationships. I put a high degree of care in what I do with my relationships, but I still do some dumb things every once in a while, or I've seen a moment where I'm like, oh, I wish I did that differently.
Oh, there's a lot. Have you ever watched Ted Lasso?
Yes, I love this show.
So you know the goldfish saying?
Yes.
Yeah, I try and do that. I try and do
short
the goldfish.
Memory.
Yeah, short memory. But for the sake of being honest and authentic, I do them all the time. And the one I can think of, because I think emotional intelligence when it comes to real estate is like being able to put ego aside and kind of taking you out of it and just, really having ownership of the situation. It's not being a doormat or not like getting beat up by people, but not being attached to it. And so everyone has bad days, man. Everyone maybe takes a call they shouldn't take. One time I took a call and I was not aware of who I was really talking to.
Who were you talking to?
I was talking to the landlord's, I think, girlfriend, partner.
Okay. All right.
Maybe wife. She happened to be a very well-known writer. And she came at me hard about some photographs we took of her house, professional photographs. And my response was not great. And we lost the client shortly after.
Yeah.
You want me to tell you my response?
Yes, please.
After she was done kind of giving her 2 cents about the photographs, and I tried to intervene to have some sort of conversation, I felt so attacked and I was so defensive. I asked her when she would like to have an adult conversation.
That's a little more polite. I'm sure there's some expletives on the other side of that, on or off the air.
She politely, I think, hung up after that. And shortly after, we got a letter.
Yeah, I like that polite hang up. that there's a certain level of anger that's involved in
My theory was she was going for that.
Okay.
Yeah, she was like, that's what she was there to do.
Yeah.
My theory is that she was chirping in his ear, these people aren't helping you. They're taking dumb pictures. Just get rid of them. I'll do it.
My guess is you haven't asked anyone to have an adult conversation with you since.
Never.
One more question. Do you relate to any TV show characters, any movie characters? I'm always interested in how people see themselves in a Hollywood setting.
So I don't necessarily relate to this person's behavior. I'll be clear about that. So we know this is going to be intense. But I relate to this person's thought process, meaning the questions this guy is asking. Mm-hmm. And that character is Matthew McConaughey on True Detective.
Oh, wow.
Season 1.
Yes, intensity.
Deep questions.
Yeah.
Very outside of the box question, everything. And I think, but like, don't get me wrong, I'm not a cop. I'm not tough. I'm not running around drinking 24/7 or whatever he does. But I think that's what makes me good at the job is I'm generally interested, and I always want to see if there's another way. Not that the way is bad, but is there something? So that's the correlation.
Any deep questions you're in pursuit of answers on now?
Deep questions? No real deep questions. But I think the one thing I would love to figure out, like, is a way that I could like send like a questionnaire to a buyer, and then have them fill out that questionnaire and be like, "This is where you're going to live based on that questionnaire."
Ooh, that's neat.
Like, don't even look there.
And yet,
like, don't talk to me about that. Like, you filled out the questionnaire. This is where we're looking.
And yet, only valuable if it's honest in the answer.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
But like, kind of like how they do those personality tests, like that would be kind of interesting. You steer people away because part of the process is you have to get people in these environments to figure out where they're going to be. But.
Well, thank you for being in our environment today. Thanks for the adult conversation. It was fun. It flowed and it was interrupted and it reflowed. And thanks for coming on today, Danny.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Cheers.
Cheers.
This podcast is about real estate with intelligence. It is pulling the sword from the stone. This podcast is about that unique balance in real estate, that balance between technological intelligence and our emotional intelligence and the transactions and interactions with one another in the real estate process. That's why we're inviting expert guests, people who are knowledgeable and bring different perspective. Join me in exploring this fascination, the look behind the scenes of technological advancement and how it's interacting with people's decisions in real estate.